irreversible? Are we fucking sure this is?
Yeah, and by the way, instead of your true self being, maybe I should be skeptical of some of the crap that I'm putting into my body. I should lean into the idea that I should put more foreign things into the human body. That's what to me is so fascinating about it, is the true self. Like, I think all of us, that's sort of part of the human journey for truth. We're all asking, who are we?
Right.
What is our true self? And maybe we should be asking ourselves, this is sort of more of a Bobby Kennedy point, but why are we putting all this weird crap into our food, into our water? Maybe we should be a little bit more skeptical of my body as a temple, rather than I'm going to welcome even more pharmaceutical intervention into the human body. It's very interesting how some religions view the body as a temple, and some religions almost invite the pollution. I think the woke thing is inviting pollution.
Well, they're also inviting. So one of the weirdest things is if you are on the wrong side of their ideology, like if you're aligned with Trump, like RFK Jr. is, now all of a sudden I've seen like people on the left that are trying to dismiss a lot of the things that he says about additives in food, about atrazine, fluoride in the water, all these different things, because now they're connecting not having toxins in your food with a right-wing idea.
It's crazy. It's mind-blowing.
It's so bananas. Like even being healthy, fitness. They're connecting fitness with a right-wing idea.
Yeah. Well, and it raises one of my sort of core political beliefs is that our politics is focused on fake shit and distractions to distract us from real stuff, right? And so if I'm looking at the environmental movement in the United States of America, and I don't even have like strong views on what the carbon footprint ultimately does. I'm sort of skeptical of the experts here, but I'm also skeptical of the other side. I just don't really know what I think about this. I think it's insane to try to eliminate fossil fuels. That's kind of a belief that I have. But it's interesting that the environmental movement in America, the only thing that talks about is the carbon footprint. And it never talks about like, why do we have the highest rates of obesity in the world right now? Right? Why is it that American kids spend less time outdoors in nature than they ever have in the history of our 250-year civilization? There's this weird way in which we get distracted by the fake stuff instead of focusing on the real stuff. And I think there is a really very important environmental conversation to be had. It was interesting when one of the first things that happened when I was a senator is we had this terrible train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. Got a lot of headlines. And it was a mistake at the time that wasn't obvious. They basically set off a few of the chemical cars. If you see the images, it looks like a nuclear bomb went off in East Palestine, Ohio. But it's putting vinyl chloride and all these other pollutants into the water, into the air, into the soil. And it was amazing. The environmental movement almost could not have cared less about a chemical explosion in rural Ohio that is potentially poisoning thousands of people, but they were really, really concerned about the carbon footprint of those same people. I'm sick of the distraction. I think we should focus on the real stuff. And unfortunately, it's true of the environmental policy, but it's true of a lot of other stuff. We just don't talk about the real thing.
The carbon footprint thing is very concerning to me because I'm seeing this concept being pushed out of having an app that monitors your carbon footprint and limiting the amount of travel you can do and limiting the amount of things.
I know where that's going to go.
Yeah, just control. It's just controlling people.
About control.
And if you can do that, then you can get away with a lot of things. You can get away with a lot of policy. Yep. You can get away with a lot of decisions that are made that people wouldn't agree with because you're going to limit so many things about their life. They're going to become accustomed to being governed in that way. It's disturbing to me that there's also profit that's being made off the green movement. There's a lot of people, like Bill Gates, who have like making a lot of money off of these environmentally conscious things.
$50 million to Kamala Harris, by the way.
Also, is bullshit fake food, that fake meat, which is not good for anybody.
That creeps me out, man.
Read about fake meat, folks. Read about how they're making this. And I'm not talking about 3D printed meat, which is a very different thing, which seems to be at least more consumable. But like the plant-based meat stuff, that's garbage. This stuff is garbage. It's highly processed garbage. If you want to eat vegetables and be vegetarian, eat Indian food, okay? Like, they make really delicious
I'm married to an
vegetarian
Indian
food.
American. They make very good vegetarian food.
They make the best vegetarian food.
Yeah.
But it tastes good, and it's actually vegetables.
Yeah.
It's not this crazy fake cheeseburger thing that you have. Like,
No, that's right. I mean,
stop eating that.
When I first started dating my wife, I just had no idea like what vegetarians ate. Right, I'm like a meat and potatoes guy from Ohio, and I wanted to make her dinner, and I wanted to really impress her because I'm like madly in love with her. And
Did you cook beef?
No, the meal that I made her, I'm not proud of this, but I'll tell you, was, you know what crescent rolls are? Those like Pillsbury yeast rolls.
Yeah.
So I rolled out a flat thing of crescent rolls. I put raw broccoli on top of it. I sprinkled ranch dressing, and I stuck it in the oven for 45 minutes. And
that was it?
Disgusting. And that was my vegetarian pizza that I made.
Wow. Did you even follow a recipe?
No.
You just like decided
I'm just like, well,
free
you know,
will?
it's like cream. I know she ate, you know, dairy. It's
Wow.
it's broccoli and it's bread, right? That's what vegetarians eat. So yeah, I think that, to your point, vegetarian food can actually be quite good.
Yes.
I don't, you know, I still like, I'm kind of one of these people where if I don't have a piece of meat, it's not a complete meal. But if you're gonna eat vegetarian, eat paneer and rice and delicious chickpeas. Do not eat this disgusting fake meat.
I'm just very skeptical when someone is promoting things for either global health or for the environment, and then I find out that they have a ton of money invested in companies that could fit those needs.
Yeah.
It's a real problem.
And
This philanthro capitalism.
Right,
thing.
it's very weird. We got to look at we have to look at the financial incentives of this. I mean, so one of the big things that me and President Trump confront all the time is the accusation that we're somehow like in bed with Russia, which is like the dumbest thing in the world to me. Like, I don't really care about Russia. I just don't think we should have a nuclear war, like writ large. I'm very anti-nuclear war.
That sounds reasonable.
Thank you, appreciate that. And one of the things they never interrogate is who is the biggest funder of the green energy movement in Europe? It's the Russians. And why are the Russians funding? It's not because they care about climate change. It's because they want the Germans and everybody else to buy Russian natural gas. And they realize that if the Germans and French close down all their coal and nuclear factories, Russia is going to have them by the balls. But, oh, it's... Mind it? Okay. Joe's did? Holy shit. The Russians are monitoring this fucking conversation.
Check. Yeah. Oh, I hear me now. I hear me.
Got it?
No, I'm out. No, it's gone again, Jamie.
Huh.
We'll be right back. Oh, I'm back. Yeah, but I don't even know if I'm going to stay back. How will I know if it keeps working? Okay.
Should we shift? Or should
No.
we just, let's try this and then we can...
Just let me know if it goes
this?
again,
Okay,
and
if
I'll
it goes
put my
again, yeah.
headphones on if it goes again. Had a slight technical problem, ladies and gentlemen.
with you.
So where were we talking about? Oh, Jamie.
This way, boys. I'm gonna kill him first. Marines.
No.
Okay.
Shoot.
It's back. It's back, Jamie. Jamie, you got to replace this. I keep saying that, but now you really do. We good? I hear it. Okay, I'm not going to move. I'm not touching anything. All right, we're back. What were we just talking about?
Well, we were talking about how... You asked, why do the Germans shut down the nuclear facilities? And I know, you know, it's they're shutting down coal, they're shutting down any of their base power and leaning really into solar and wind. But again, the green energy movement in Europe is heavily funded by the Russians because the Russians want to have, because they produce so much natural gas, they want to have Europe by the balls. So again,
How did they convince them to shut down their nuclear power plants? though?
well, in the
That's
same
so
way that
stupid.
Bill Gates is convincing us to eat fake meat is they fund all this stuff and they make it
think
about
he
the
is.
environment. Well, that's true. But he's trying to.
But
he's
everybody,
not
the problem
successful.
is you look at him and you go, hey. How are you a health expert? This is look at you. The funniest thing ever was when Elon showed a photo of Bill Gates next to a photo of a pregnant man emoji and said, if you want to lose a boner real quick,
This way! They got no way out there!
That's a wild boy.
Elon is funny as shit, man. He's actually
Funny as shit.
Yeah,
Getting
he
dumped
really
on
is.
by that guy's gotta suck. Because
Yeah.
you can't even say he's a dumbass.
Right. That's right. Yeah. You can say many things. You can't say he's a dumbass.
You get dumped on by one of the smartest guys alive. But the point is, like, Bill doesn't look good. Looks terrible. He's aging way harder than Trump. Like, it doesn't, whatever you're doing, don't eat like that anymore. Like, go to an actual doctor. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what you're doing. Who's telling you to eat your fake meat? This is, you look like shit.
Yeah,
So you can't
that's
give
right.
advice. This is crazy. You
That's
can't give
exactly
advice about health.
Yeah.
You're not a healthy person.
That's right.
You know?
I did. So there's this thing called the Munich Security Conference in Germany. Obviously, it's in Munich. It's kind of like Davos, but for national security. And I went there. It was like a big deal for me because I went in there as the one skeptic in the entire this, like massive Euro complex. Kamala Harris is there. I went as the person skeptical of the escalation of Ukraine because I think the war in Ukraine is insane, and that we should have a policy effectively of promoting the peace in the region. And we walk in, and one of the people that I'm on this panel with is the leader of the German Green Party. And, you know, she's like 30 years old, and she really, really cares about Russia, Ukraine. She's like the youngest person in the German government. And you realize you are like the exact, like you guys are literally Russian influence. Like you're accusing me of wanting to do Russia's bidding. You're encouraging your own country from the perch of government to shut down all baseload power. And you're not even self-aware about how much of your own propaganda is funded by the country that's benefiting from this. The lack of ability to interrogate, I mean, Bill Gates, you know, like, maybe he's a good guy, I'm highly skeptical, I don't know him very well, but he's getting rich off of all of this stuff that he's supporting in the name of health or in the name of climate. Our inability to just ask ourselves, who's getting rich from this stuff? Maybe we should be skeptical of the people getting rich from this stuff is one of our big failures as a political society.
It's a sheep costume. You put on a sheep costume
put on a
when
sheep
you're
costume.
and you make a lot of money with global health.
That's
you
right.
know? And who doesn't want global health? What a nice guy.
Yeah.
Oh, he's like very philanthropic. He's
Well,
spending all
yeah.
this money trying to help poor people.
Right.
And then you find out, like, hey, wait a minute, how much money can you make doing that?
Exactly.
You paid out $500 million doing that?
Exactly.
That's crazy. It's a very sneaky move, but he's a smart guy. He's done a lot of very sneaky moves, like the donating all the money to the media companies, which is why they never criticize him.
That's right.
Fair. He's donated like
Yeah.
$350 million to all these different companies.
That's right. Or, you know, this is, I think, one of the reasons why we don't have more people asking questions about Big Pharma.
Of course.
Is the entire national media. Think about how many pharmaceutical advertisements you watch when you watch a football game.
Yeah, let's get into this, because this is an interesting one. So, one of the things that happened that separated us from the rest of the world other than New Zealand is in the 1990s they allowed pharmaceutical drug companies to advertise.
That's right.
Is that something that has to stay that way? Is that something that can be changed with policy, or is the financial incentives of that too big to move?
Oh, you could change it with policy. I don't know.
Do you think you would have enough support to do something like that?
So I've been critical of pharmaceutical advertising for a long time. My assumption is that there are not enough people who would like to do it to actually get it done. But you know, I've never actually talked to my colleagues about it. So maybe it's possible.
I bet you ask the American people. You know, I bet if that's one of those things that you put it to a national vote instead of representatives, call them representatives, special interest groups.
Yeah. Well,
Special
that's
interest
exactly
groups,
right.
lobbyists,
Yeah.
the amount of money.
Yeah, the whole conduit of money into politics is fundamentally broken. I think we have to fix that. But I mean, here's the thing, and I say this is critical of pharmaceutical advertising. Whenever I see a pharma ad, and I pretty much only see them when I'm watching football, I'm always shocked that they actually influence anybody, right? Because it's like, oh, take this drug for rheumatoid arthritis, and you can have all these positive experiences. And it's like, oh, the side effects are, you know, erectile dysfunction, rashes on your face,
Suicidal
ideation, tumors in your brain, and you'll hate yourself and be depressed. So you'll need this other drug. And I always wonder, like, you get so many of these weird side effects in the advertisements. How do they actually work? So I actually think that the real corruption is not really that they like persuade Americans. I mean, if you're going to take a drug, you're probably going to take a drug based on conversations with your doctor more than a pharma advertisement, but they do corrupt the media ecosystem. Because if you're getting all that money from the pharma companies, then you're not going to launch investigations into some of the things you should be launching investigations into.
100%. And that's why it's dangerous, because it's not like these are completely innocent companies and have never done anything wrong. So if you all of a sudden have them removed from your list of people that you're investigating just because they advertise, they've essentially bribed you.
That's right.
They've bribed you, and you're supposed to be the people that distribute the actual news to the American people, and you're compromised.
So, okay, so let me tell you this story, and this is purely secondary. So if you know, somebody tries to fact check it, I heard this from a friend, but I heard it from a friend I trusted. So he was a guy I knew, and he worked at the largest industry lobbying organization for the pharmaceutical companies. And I was in D.C., this is a long time ago, and I just kind of ran into him. And, you know, I care a lot about the opioid problem. My mom struggled with opioids for a very long time. She's been clean and sober for a while, but I'm very proud of her. I love you, Mom. I know you're watching this. But I ran into this guy in the street in D.C., and he had just quit his job for this pharmaceutical lobbying organization, or he was talking about quitting. And I was like, well, why? He's like, man, we just did something that's very dark. And basically what they had figured out is because American Indian tribes, Native Americans, have tribal sovereignty. And so they figured out, I guess, that if they gave some Native American tribe some fraction of a penny of the royalties from the sale of opioids, that they could actually insulate themselves from litigation around the prescription opioid epidemic. And I guess this guy was just like, thought it was so dirty that he was like, I can't work for this organization anymore. And I was like, holy shit, that is some pretty dark stuff. So you guys are giving some Native American tribe like pennies so that you can insulate yourself from pharmaceutical litigation. I'd be very curious. I should follow up on this to see if that actually happened. But again, just to be clear, if the media tries to fact check me, this is what I heard from a friend.
Let's let Jamie fact check it right
Jamie,
now.
I'm very curious if this actually happened. Look into it, because but I think it did happen, because I saw the look on this guy's face, and he was like, "Man, this is some pretty dark stuff."
That's crazy. Yeah. But that's how corporations behave. You know, we were just the trigonometry guys were on here yesterday, and we were talking about it. That corporations behave like psychopaths. Like that. There's a book about it. It's like they describe how this.
Oh, is that? Oh, you got it. Okay.
Try now. Tell me now.
I've not heard that click.
Yeah. Is that it? Good? Okay.
Yeah. What was that thing you wanted to check real quick? Sorry.
The pharmaceutical companies using, giving royalty streams to Native American tribes to insulate themselves from lawsuits. Anyway, yeah.
Very scary stuff.
Save some orcs for you.
Yeah, this is like one of the things that I think is genuinely different about.
That gun well defended,
I don't
no
want to get
mistake.
two parts of political here, but about Donald Trump's Republican Party. I mean, obviously, like there are corporations that we're more pro certain businesses, and we tend to be more anti certain businesses, like for example big tech. I hate big tech, we can get into that later. But fundamentally, I think President Trump has changed the mindset of the Republican Party to where it was like instinctively always pro-corporate. We're now sometimes willing to ask, well, is this corporation's interest in the American interest? Like there was this famous quote, I believe, from the leadership of GM back in the 1950s, that General Motors' interest is America's interest. And I'm probably butchering the quote, but sort of paraphrased. Can anybody really in 2024 say that Google's interest is America's interest? Or Apple, which employs thousands of slaves in Shenzhen, is Apple's interest is America's interest? Like, I just don't. That's ridiculous. And the fact that we're at least somewhat skeptical of corporate power in the Republican Party, I think is a very good trend for us.
It is kind of weird that one of the wokest companies, if you thought about like woke companies and like super progressive and like on the right side of everything, Apple. Apple's like one of the best ones. And they have phones that are made by slaves. Yeah. Like the people,
like definitionally.
Yeah. The people they're putting nets around the building because so many of them were jumping to their deaths.
Yes.
Instead of fixing the work conditions, they just go,
that's right.
Nets.
Yeah, put up some nets so that people can't commit suicide.
The crazy thing is, you still, like, all these, like, progressive people are using these devices to talk about, like, important social issues.
Oh, yeah. Well, and talking about distraction, right? The distraction, like distraction politics versus real politics.
Yeah.
If Apple says #BLM and gives a few $1 million to a trans rights organization, then the entire political left ignores that they're profiting off of slave labor.
It's bizarre. Now,
it's
why
crazy.
can't Apple, well, here it is, change bedfellows, Native American tribes, big farm,
Okay, so this is like a real-
legitimacy of their alliance. Wow, so true.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
this is about exactly. You said it's 2019. I was going to say, I think I saw that guy in like 2019.
It's so good. It's so crazy, man. It's so sick. But it's what we were talking about. If you allow these corporations, look, they have an obligation to their shareholders. They have to make more money.
Sure.
What's the best way to make more money? Not get sued. What's the best way to not get
course.
sued? For syrup on a loophole.
Yeah.
You get some
Exactly.
Adderall-riddled psychopath who's been working 16 hours like, I got a plan to get us out of here. And it works. It's legal.
I'm sorry. Like, look, I get the imperative to make money, but the guy who thought that up is a grade A sociopath.
Yes.
I mean, that person is, I don't want them anywhere near my kids.
You gotta put guardrails up. Like, you have to have laws. That's why you can't have
Yes.
insider trading, right? Like, you have to have
That's right.
guardrails up.
Well,
And
this
if
is-
you
yeah.
don't, people go ham.
Yes. And this is why, look, corporations want to go make money. They should make money.
Yes.
Fine. But my job is public and social policy. And what really pisses me off, and frankly what should piss off more Republicans, because again, historically the Republican Party has been the more pro-corporate party, we should be saying to the more that these corporations are engaged in social policy, in particular left-wing social policy, the more that we should be saying, I don't know that I want to give you everything that you want, which is, of course, what the historical party did, but I think is much different in the last few years.
I'm just scared that the tentacles of the pharmaceutical industry are so deeply entrenched in politics and in media that you can't just shake them off. You can't just say, hey, you can't advertise on TV anymore, or hey,
Yeah.
you no longer have exemption from responsibility from the side effects of certain drugs.
Yep.
Because that whole thing they pulled off with the exemption of pharmaceutical companies being responsible for injuries from
Injuries
vaccines.
from the vax was crazy.
It's crazy because
I
you just
believe it still
empower these
exists.
people that have lied forever. Yeah, it does still exist.
And it still exists, and that is totally insane. And I mean, you know, I took the vax, and you know, I haven't been boosted or anything, but the moment where I really started to get red pilled on the whole vax thing was the sickest that I've been in the last 15 years by far was when I took the vaccine. And I've had COVID at this point 5 times. I was in bed for 2 days. My heart was racing. I was like, the fact that we're not even allowed to talk about that, even, you know, I no like serious injury, but even the fact that we're not even allowed to talk about the fact that I was as sick as I've ever been for 2 days, and the worst COVID experience I had was like a sinus infection. I'm not really willing to trade that. And you don't even, you know, everybody that I know, or a lot of people I know, they talk about the second shot that they got of the vaccine was it made them really, really sick. Well, that's a side effect, and not a side effect that we even talk about enough in this country.
No, it's also, again, we're talking about companies that have a long history of lying and being forced to pay criminal fines, and then we're giving them this exemption from being responsible for any of the side effects.
Yeah, and who do you think those big pharma companies donate to politically in 2024? I'll give you a big fat guess.
Probably Kamala Harris.
By a significant margin.
Well, particularly with RFK Jr. being attached to Trump.
Sure.
With RFK Jr. comes a lot of, you know, like, there's a lot. There's a lot that you're going to have to handle there. But that's, the question is, like, are they so entrenched that it's impossible to these things that disturb us? The fact that they have exemption from any responsibility because of the vaccine, the fact that they have the ability to advertise on television. Can those things be removed? Is that a possible thing?
I think it's a possible thing, but because I haven't actually done the work to figure out how many of my colleagues would sign on to this, I can't say whether it's a certain thing or a likely thing or just something that we should be working on. I mean, you're using this as a thought experiment. If there was one thing we could do to rein in pharmaceutical companies, Would it be liability on the back stuff? Would it be advertising? My intuition is actually might be the advertising on healthcare stuff, because that's the way in which they involve the media in this whole scam.
That would be great.
But
the vaccine thing is important too, because
I will look into it. That's what I'll say here, because I would need to talk to people to see the same.
it's a weird one where you're not even allowed to question. You're not allowed to discuss it, and that becomes very religious, just like all these other things we talk about, where you have this thing that everybody speaks about in hushed tones. People know people that have been vaccine injured, and particularly people on the left, they're very reluctant to discuss it, even publicly.
Yeah.
I know people who are public people who have had serious vaccine side effects who do not want anyone to talk about it.
Absolutely.
They're scared of being labeled an anti-vaxxer.
I have a Senate colleague who doesn't want to talk about it, but worries that it's like permanently affected his sort of sense of balance and dizziness and vertigo. And yeah, it happens. I've talked to a number of people who think that they got vaccine injured. Some of them are public about it, and some of them are not. But here's the thing: like, I'm not even. You're probably more anti-pharma than I am. Like, there are certain things.
I'm pro-pharma too. I think they make great drugs that help people with all sorts of conditions,
right?
Diabetes medication.
And like the sickle cell stuff that's coming out now, we maybe have cured sickle cell disease in Black Americans because of the gene therapy. I read about it a couple weeks ago, actually, that the first experimental therapy, and it was hard for the kid who took it, but you had like an 11 or 12-year-old Black American just walk out of the hospital, and he promptly cured sickle cell disease. That stuff is amazing, but I actually think that in some ways, what we should be encouraging these companies to do is that, right?
Yes.
We want them to develop the life-saving drugs. We don't want them to get rich by shielding themselves from liability or working with Native American tribes so that they don't get sued. And I actually think there maybe even is a harmony between those viewpoints, because if they had to get rich by developing life-saving therapeutics, and that's the only way they could get rich, then they'd probably do more of that, right?
100%.
But again, that's where public policy comes in, and that's where, like, my job is to make sure that when the pharmaceutical companies get rich, they get rich by curing diseases, not by doing, like, weird, psychotic things with Native American tribes.
And you can't have this argument that we need exemption from responsibility because otherwise we're not going to be able to profit off of these things. Like,
absolutely.
Well, that means you're making stuff that too many people are getting sick from, so they're fucking suing you.
Well, that's socialized costs, right? It's one of the biggest problems with corporate America is socialized costs but privatized profits. Right. And what you really want is that you want major American companies, and I'm a believer in the market economy, you want them to absorb the benefits but also the costs, and that's often what doesn't happen. Like, for example, so I talked about this train disaster in East Palestine, and the railroad companies hate me because I kind of went on a crusade against them afterwards. And what I realized is, think of all the costs of that disaster. Think of the healthcare costs, the welfare costs from people who lost their jobs, the declining home values in that community, just all of the costs absorbed by that community. And the railroads are paying slap-on-the-hand fines. And it sort of occurred to me that the reason they're not more serious about these train disasters is because they're privatizing the rewards. But when a major train disaster happens, who picks up the tab? It's the local residents and it's the American taxpayer, and that's something that fundamentally has to change.
Yeah, that has to change.
Second
and
Lieutenant Mira,
when you're talking about the
203rd
cost
Cadian
from a
Regiment.
place like East Palestine,
Titus,
how
the Ultramarines.
much can they clean that
I'm all
up?
that's left,
Like,
my lord.
how long does that
Unless my
stay
commanders
toxic?
rise from the
Man,
Because
I-
it was millions
So far, they
of
seem
gallons,
content to
right?
stay
Wasn't
I-
it some? What was the number of gallons?
I don't know
of
the
stuff?
number of gallons, but it was a lot. And I hate to say the answer to your question, how much can they clean up? The answer is I don't know. And I actually, this is one of my biggest frustrations, probably my single biggest frustration over my time in the Senate is when this happened, a bunch of the residents came to
That is
me.
why we are here.
It's actually very sweet and even
Come with me, then.
patriotic, but certainly self-sacrificing,
my
where they
lord.
said, look,
We've got a slight
no
orc
one
problem
knows
down here.
what the effect of this shit is going to be 15 years down the road, right? Because we weren't worried about, okay, a guy drinks the water in East Palestine and drops dead. The water levels did not have toxins at that level, but the question was, what happens when you're imbibing the stuff, breathing it in, drinking it at trace levels for 10, 15 years? Like, do you have weird diseases down the road? Hopefully not, right? I pray every day that hopefully not, but you can only study that in the moment.
Right.
And so we actually, working with a public health epidemiologist in North Carolina and some in Ohio, we actually came up with a plan. Like, here's what you would need to do. You'd collect samples in the first 6 months to a year after the disaster. And I'm talking about like fingernail clippings, things like that. You'd establish a baseline of toxins in people's blood. And then 5 years later, 10 years later, you'd try to figure out what the toxins were in people's blood 5 years, 10 years down the road. And then you'd ask yourself, what weird diseases, if any, are people starting to develop after 5, 10, 15 years, right? The long-term health effects of this stuff. And it was, in some ways, a really interesting thing to study because we had never had a chemical disaster where we tried to study the effects years down the road. And of course, how much would this cost? Between $5 and $20 million over the whole lifetime of the study. We couldn't get Biden-Harris. We couldn't even get some of my colleagues in the United States Senate to give a shit. And it's really frustrating to me because the time has now passed, right? All these people who are saying we are volunteering to be a guinea pig to understand the long-term health consequences, the time has passed, and we're never going to know because we didn't get the money to do the very small amount of money to do that study then. So you asked that question. The answer is, I don't know. I tried like hell to find out.
Do you think that there's someone influencing them to not fund these studies because they don't want responsibility for the spills?
Yeah, I thought a lot about that. I think in this particular case, it was just bureaucratic bullshit and too many people being distracted.
There's a lot of that, right?
There's a lot of that, right? And look, sometimes, to be clear, there is outright malevolence. There's lobbyists who are in their ear. I think in this case, it was just, a bunch of people in rural Ohio that nobody, except for, a few of us, I care about them, obviously, but no person in the Harris administration cared about. And so when we went to the White House and just said, you could move money, like, even just give us a couple $1 million to collect the samples and get the study started, and then we'll privately fund it down the road. We couldn't get anything from them. And I think it was just, they were like, we've got bigger fish to fry.
So do you know what efforts have been made to clean that area up, or what actually
I mean, look, we've definitely...
Does it show what it is, Jamie? So,
yeah,
25,800 gallons of TILX, 25,800, what's that?
That's the car ID, the capacity, and then the context is what?
100,000 gallons of that.
Yeah.
Oh, each car has,
each car had different stuff. Yeah, each car had different stuff.
So what's the total of all of it?
It's millions, right? Millions or millions of liters. But look, I mean...
And all that stuff just leaks into the groundwater, it goes into
and a lot of
soil.
people in rural areas, a lot of people in well water. A lot of people are just breathing in the air. I mean, what I went...
know what the health consequences are for those folks for years.
We won't know, and we may never really know because we didn't collect the samples at the time. We didn't establish the baseline. That was what my epidemiologist guy that I talked to in North Carolina said. You've got to establish the baseline. Because here's the deal. Fast forward 10 years. People get weird cancers. Sometimes because chemical spills, sometimes just because it's human biology. Somebody will sue the train company, which is Norfolk, I think Norfolk Southern, will sue the train company, and they'll say, I've got this weird cancer because of you. And what Norfolk Southern will say is, no, you don't. You don't have this weird cancer because of me. You have it because of just, you sort of lost the game of Russian roulette that is human biology. And what we could have said conclusively was yes or no. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to say that. This is one of the things, like when we're in office, the first disaster that we have, hopefully there aren't any, but there always are. First chemical disaster that we're going to take the infrastructure of that study, and right away, we're going to try to establish a baseline.
Is it possible